There are places on this planet where human handiwork ceases to feel like architecture and begins to feel like an act of psychological defiance against nature. Here, in the basalt heart of the Deccan Plateau at Ellora, stands a mountain that was carved inside out. When you first step into Cave 16, the Kailasa Temple, the brain tries to process it using the usual rules of building: foundation laid, stones quarried, mortar mixed, walls raised. But as your eyes trace the sheer 100-foot walls surrounding you, a disquieting realization sets in. Nothing here was added. Every column, every life-sized elephant, every relief panel was already inside this rock. The sculptures didn't build a temple. They removed a cliff until only a temple was left. In the 8th century CE, the Rashtrakuta kings didn't merely want to build a house for Lord Shiva. They wanted to bring Mount Kailash, the sacred, unattainable Himalayan peak, down into the dry heat of the Deccan plains. But how do you sculpt a mountain out of a single rock from top to down? This video is about the Kailash Temple and will try to answer all the questions you had about this magnificent temple. The Kailasa Temple did not look like how it looks today: dark, bare basalt. Under the Rashtrakutas and later Yadava rulers, the entire complex was coated in a thick porcelain-like white lime plaster called chunam, mixed with crushed seashells and egg whites. Traces of this plaster and vivid later paintings, known as the Rangamahal layer, still cling to the upper ceilings. Against the dark green Sahyadri hills, the white temple would have literally shone like a glacier in the sun. A truly Himalayan mountain in the Deccan, representing Mount Kailash, the abode of Lord Shiva. The first stage of construction began at the highest point of the basalt cliff face. The master architect did not start from the front. Instead, he commanded the cutting of a massive vertical trenches directly down into the rock. These trenches were cut 100 feet deep and delineated the precise rectangular volume that would become the final courtyard. This initial cut separated the future temple from the surrounding mountain. This phase defined entire geometry before a single decorative element was started. It required absolute precision. Once the rectangular boundary was established by the deep trenches, excavation moved horizontally across the separate volume from the rear cliff face towards the front. Working downwards, thousands of laborers systematically hammered and chiseled the basalt, removing hundreds and thousands of tons of rock. Crucially, they left large, untouched blocks of stone in place where the shikara, the gopuram, and the intermediate pavilions or the mantaps were to be carved. During this phase, the solid matrix was the scaffolding. The sculptures stood on the very rock they were removing. The next stage required extreme synchronized coordination. As the heavy quarrying laborers excavated lower, the master shilpins or the sculptors immediately followed behind them on the newly revealed upper sections. The topmost elements, such as the kalasha and the roof decoration of the shikara, were carved first and finished completely. The sculptors then worked downwards, finishing pillars, ceilings, and internal chambers, refining the details as the rough rock scaffolding was removed beneath their feet. This approach minimized the need for constructing wooden or bamboo scaffolding. The workers carved the decorative details while standing on the remaining rock matrix that would be excavated the next week. In the next phase, work proceeded simultaneously on the exterior courtyard and the interior chambers. This was managed by excavating internal tunnels from the finished courtyard levels into the remaining central rock mass. This allowed separate crews to carve the intricate interior pillars, walls, and the central garbhagriha without interrupting the heavy downward clearing work in the main courtyard. This approach allowed the exterior and the interior work to proceed in parallel, speeding up the timeline for the construction. The last area to be reached was the courtyard floor and the base foundation. This is where the life-sized elephants, lions, the massive frieze depicting scenes from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata were sculpted in high relief around the central plinth. The temple was only complete when the final courtyard floor was leveled and the drainage channels were cut into the stone. The drainage channels were essential during the monsoon season. The entire weight of the temple complex was around 2 lakh tons. It was a monolithic. It shows the seamless connection to the earth at its base. This was the final cut made. The construction of the Kailasa Temple Cave 16 relies on subtractive architecture, carved top down into the tough Deccan trap basalt. Artisans use traditional iron and organic tools alongside methodological techniques. Hardened iron chisels or tanka and pointed chisels were used for bulk splitting. Fine-tipped iron chisels were used for micro-carving the reliefs. Wooden mallets and heavy iron hammers were used to drive heavy chisels into dense basalt strata. Wedges and expansive methods which were scientific were used. They drilled lines of small holes along natural cleavage lines, inserted dry wooden wedges and saturated them with water. The expanding wood split multi-ton basalt blocks away from the main cliff without microfracturing the adjacent stone. Thermal fracturing and fire setting methods were also used. Artisans built controlled fires against raw stone faces and doused them with cold water. Thermal shock shattered surface layers into manageable fragments for rapid trenching. Plumb lines or lamba sutras and geometric grids were used. Weight strings suspended from upper terraces maintained vertical alignment as digging progressed 100 feet down. Plastering tools and chunam made up of crushed seashells, lime and plant extracts were used to give the dark basalt a marble-like finish. There are, however, alternative theories floating around about the tools which were used, from advanced machines and even aliens, which are, however, very far-fetched. My take on the tools is that the artisans were well versed in geology and properties of basalt as they had enough experience of carving on these rocks. Some of the Buddhist caves are much older than Kailasha. They used iron tools to break and chisel the rocks, which people nowadays find it difficult to understand as they have lost the knowledge. It is similar to people who have seen houses constructed 30 to 40 years back. They will remember that all the work was done by simple instruments and a lot of manual labor. People below 20 years old will find it difficult to understand that tall buildings were built without any modern equipment. This brings us to one of the most debated questions in Indian archaeology. What happened to the rubble? An estimated 2 lakhs to 4 lakh tons of Deccan trap basalt were quarried out of this gorge. Yet standing in the surrounding valley today, there is no massive waste mounds or slag heaps. People present the absence of debris around the temple area as a mystery. One question to be asked is, what would we have done with the debris and usable stones in our times? We would reuse it, of course, This is what was done by the builders of this temple. Modern archaeological reviews and geological surveys offer compelling hypothesis. The excavated stone wasn't discarded as rubbish. High density basalt is prime building material. It was reused across the region to build foundations for the ancient city of Ellora, construct local water bunds, pave roads, and raise nearby defense works. What was taken away from Kailasa became the invisible scaffolding of the empire around it. The stone that the temple is built from is the Deccan Traps basalt, formed tens of millions of years ago by vast volcanic eruptions that flooded western India with lava. It is dense, extremely hard and brittle, yet remarkably weather resistant. Working this stone required a profound understanding of geology of the rock. This the artisans knew well. Information about the artisans come from historical inscriptions and medieval Marathi text, which point to master builder guilds, most notably named after Kokasa, a legendary master architect mentioned in the 12th century inscriptions and texts like the Katha Kalpataru. Inscriptions from the central India centuries later still proudly trace sculpture lineages back to the illustrious Kokasa family. These sculptors were not isolated local workers. The Rashtrakuta kings, having expanded their power by overcoming the Chalukyas, brought together master craft guilds from across south and central India, incorporating Dravidian design elements from Pattadakal and Kanchipuram into the Deccan landscape. While the ancient stone-cutting guilds transformed over generation into distinct artisan communities across Maharashtra and Karnataka, the traditional Tapati or architect lineages are still active in South India to this day. They preserve the exact mathematical Shilpa Shastras used to cut this stone. In the famous Baroda copperplate grant of Karakaraja II, there is a haunting line describing the architect staring back at his completed creation and saying, "Oh, how was it that I built it?" Even the man who designed it felt that human hands alone could not account for what stood before him. At the base of the Kailasa Temple, the mountain doesn't just hold up a sanctuary. It tells the foundational stories of a civilization. Here, carved into solid volcanic basalt, are the Indians' epic friezes. On the southern wall, the Ramayana unfolds in a tired relief. You can trace Rama's exile, the multi-headed demon king Ravana attempting to shake Mount Kailasha, and the epic siege of Lanka. Stone figures frozen mid-stride for 12 centuries. Turn to the northern wall and you meet the Mahabharata. The sculptors capture the chaos of Kurukshetra, chariot wheels locked in combat, archers drawing bows, and the psychological gravity of duty and destiny written into raw rock. These aren't merely decorative panels. They form the literal foundation upon which the sacred rests. A reminder that before you enter into the divine, you must walk through the stories that define us. If you look closer at the relief panels, and here your eye must linger on the smaller details, you will encounter fascinating surprises. Among the classical Puranic depictions of Ravana shaking Mount Kailasa, you will spot a curious dragon-like creature. How does a dragon appear in 8th century Indian cave? In Indian temple iconography, this figure is often a variant of the Makara or Yali, a composite mythical beast blending features of an elephant, lion, crocodile, and a serpent. But Ellora sat along ancient trade arteries connecting the Deccan to the Silk Road networks and oceanic trade routes. Monks, merchants, and artisans traveled between Central Asia, China, and Western India. Over centuries of artistic cross-pollination happened. The classical Indian Makara morphed on these walls into a creature with distinct serpentine dragon-like qualities. A visual record of global artistic exchange frozen in the Maharashtrian stone. The temple has some amazing structural feats. A cantilevered stone canopy overhangs 26 feet into empty air without a single pillar supporting it. In 1993, when a devastating earthquake struck Latur 300 kilometers away, modern buildings collapsed. Yet this unsupported 1200-year-old rock canopy didn't lose a single stone. To truly understand Kailasa, you must look beyond Cave 16 and its magnificent temple. Ellora is a sanctuary of 34 major rock-cut monuments stretched across 2 kilometers. What makes this place extraordinary is that Buddhists, Hindus and Jain temples exist side by side, carved into the rock for 4 centuries. This is a place where 3 great religions lived side by side peacefully. No destruction, just pure secularism at its best. For me, it appears that they were competing for attention from the people. The Kailash Temple was the jewel in the crown. The Rashtrakuta monarchs Dandi Durga, Krishna I and Amogavarsha were masters of pluralistic statecraft. Royal patronage was not a blunt weapon used to enforce religious uniformity. It was an arena of competitive prestige. A king might endow a Buddhist monastery, commission a monumental Hindu monolith like Kailasa, and personal scholars like Amogavarsha might patronize Jain philosophy. The same stonemason guilds worked across all 3 traditions. It reflects a world where religious boundaries were fluid, permeable, and deep-rooted in a shared intellectual culture. The cliff at Ellora was an open-air library of Indian thought. In the late 9th century, the Rashtrakuta imperial capital shifted south to Manyaketa. Over subsequent centuries, trade routes shifted and royal court centers moved. While the nearby Grishneshwar Jyotirling retained continuous active worship, the sheer scale of Kailasa made it difficult to maintain as a routine temple. It evolved from a daily ritual center into a legendary monument, a place of awe for travelers, pilgrims and scholars. In the late 17th century, Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb sent troops with intent to destroy or deface the monument. But the temple resisted destruction. You cannot easily demolish a structure when the temple is the mountain itself. After 3 years, only minor defacement of small carvings was achieved, leaving the massive structural body untouched. In the 18th and 19th centuries, travelers like Charles Warre Mallet and John B. Seeley documented Ellora for global audience, marveling at what local villagers at Virul had quietly protected for centuries. When you stand at the center of the Kailasa courtyard and look up, you aren't just looking at a stone, you're looking at human ambition pushed to its absolute limit. A vision where belief was stronger than basalt and where anonymous hands carved an immortal mountain out of silence.